Hello and thanks for tuning in. In this video, I want to go over the spreadsheet I made, which is kind of a simplified analysis of whether or not it's actually worth switching from AutoCAD to one of the various AutoCAD alternatives or AutoCAD clones out there. So yeah, the spreadsheet, it's just an approximation of what you could perhaps expect if you did switch from AutoCAD. You don't actually need this spreadsheet to do an analysis yourself. Your parameters will vary a little bit compared to mine, but I just want to give you guys a general idea of what to expect. And quite often I'll run through some scenarios here and you'll see that it's, in some cases, it's clear cut as to whether switching or not switching is the right call. So anyways, I'm going to post this on YouTube. I'm going to call this kind of like a draft. If I see enough interest, then I'm going to try to create a whole playlist on this subject. So if you do find this video interesting, helpful, definitely at least leave a like, but also even leave a comment. I'd love to hear your guys' feedback as well. Okay, so before giving you an overview of the spreadsheet, I'm just going to mention that the programs I'm comparing, well, I'm starting with AutoCAD, of course. That's a benchmark. We kind of have to compare against it. I have AutoCAD LT listed here. That'll surprise some people, but AutoCAD LT is a legitimate AutoCAD replacement. In fact, many of the offices I worked in would have been just fine using LT instead of AutoCAD Full. I have BricsCAD Pro and BricsCAD Lite. Now, I need to say that I've only done the 30-day free trials with this program. When you do the 30-day free trial, you get every level of the program, not just BricsCAD Lite. But it felt good to me, but a 30-day free trial, that's not enough to really get a handle of the program and know if it's going to perform or not perform for you. And G-Star CAD, that's the other CAD clone I've used. I've used a few other ones as well, but again, I just did free trials with them. G-Star CAD I've used for over a year now, so I'm very familiar with the program. I know what it can do, can't do. So yeah, so I have all these 5 programs compared, but if you do your own analysis, you really only need AutoCAD and whatever program you're anticipating that you'll use. Okay, so I can give you a quick overview of this spreadsheet. So first I want to discuss all these things. These are basically parameters that are dictated either by the draftsperson themselves or the firm they work for. So I have number of weeks worked per year, number of hours per week. This would be drafting hours, not your typical 40-hour work week, unless you're drafting for 40 hours per week, of course. So that gives you total hours per year. And then this is important. This is opportunity cost per each extra drafting hour. What I mean by that is, let's say you're drafting 20 hours per week. You switch programs, your productivity goes down, and now you're doing 30 hours per week. Well, those 10 extra hours, how costly is it to you? Maybe you're doing something like material take costs that are very lucrative. You're losing the ability to do other stuff basically, and you got to attach a nominal cost to that. This value can be very ballpark. It just has to exist and be something kind of reasonable, right? Okay, so moving on, we have initial costs all listed down here. This is going to include things like perpetual licensing fees. In these 2 rows, I have my calculations for the transition cost. This is important and you should put conservative numbers here, because the more hours you spend transitioning, the less your hit to productivity will be, and the productivity factor weighs heavily on the bottom line. So for AutoCAD Lite, I only have 20 hours listed here, but if I went from AutoCAD or any program that supports AutoLisp to one that doesn't, I'm going to take a pretty big hit to productivity. I can mitigate that by developing, say, my ribbon panel a bit better, creating some new and better dynamic blocks, creating some macros as well to make up for it, but it's going to take time. I'm going to spend hours doing that. So what I have is the number of hours to transition times my opportunity cost up here, and that gives me a final number right here. So I add that to the perpetual licensing fee. And then this is a very arbitrary number, but personally I feel like these perpetual licensing fees, these one-time fees, they're kind of overrated, because you have to account for the risk that the software might become obsolete. Maybe the company will get bought out or go bankrupt, who knows. So what I've done here, I've put 5 years. Like if I buy BricsCAD, I think I'm going to use this software longer than 5 years, but to mitigate the risk, I'm putting a very conservative number here. And what this allows me to do is break all these costs down into an average yearly cost. Later on, I compare things actually on a yearly basis and later on by a hourly basis, just to have a nice number to compare to. So that helps me break these that also helps me break these numbers down into something that I can actually compare to the subscription fees down here, which I'll get into next. So next we have our yearly costs. So for AutoCAD products, Autodesk products, we'd put our subscription fees here. For the programs with perpetual licenses, they still want to try to get you to buy their maintenance packages or their upgrades. So I have that listed here. And to keep current, you're going to have to upgrade your programs, these programs fairly often. I have 3 years listed here. Might even go ahead and put 2 years in there. You can see these costs start going up a little bit, but not a lot. So I add all these rows up, all these rows right here to give me an average maintenance or upgrade cost per year. So that's just dividing this number by this right here, right? Other fees, that could be maybe a perpetual licensing fee for some sort of plugin you're using. And finally, one of the most important rows in the sheet is the productivity factor. Now, this is super important because if you switch, don't consider your fees alone, because if you're say you're using AutoCAD, you're doing 20 hours per week of drafting, and you use a program that's going to knock your productivity in half, it's going to cost you like a lot of money, a lot of time. Sometimes it's hard to put a nominal cost on your time, but trust me, you want to put a generous value rate here, because you do not want to spend way too many hours drafting or making up for a program when you got better things to do, right? So yeah, these productivity factors are of the utmost importance. So these productivity factors basically use this opportunity cost for each extra drafting hour to figure out the nominal cost of any productivity loss, and that ends up being quite a bit of money by the end of the year, right? So anyways, I have total yearly costs. Next, I just grab these figures from above right here, add them to the total, and then I have total yearly cost adjusted rate here. Okay, so next we take the total yearly cost and divide it by these total drafting hours per year, and that gives me an average hourly cost. So I know you people that are super good with spreadsheets, really good with economics and finance and stuff, are thinking, wait, how do you use your opportunity cost to get an average hourly cost? Because this is your average hourly cost per drafting hour. You're totally right if you think the spreadsheet is flawed or a little bit inaccurate in that sense, because if I was going to make this spreadsheet a little bit better, a little bit more accurate, what I need to do is have total drafting hours per week and total non-drafting hours per week, and apply this cost to whichever amount of those drafting hours per week spill over into those non-drafting hours. And I did these calculations by hand before, and I found that these figures on the bottom line, they're not actually affected that much if I do a more appropriate analysis. So all I'm trying to do here is create a clear picture on the parameters that actually affect whether or not it's actually worth switching or worth staying with AutoCAD. That was my intent. So yeah, although the spreadsheet definitely isn't perfect, it does achieve that, I think. Okay, so I just want to mention two things before I get into doing actual scenarios. I'm plugging some numbers into here and seeing the results on our bottom line. I just want to say that first, any result you see here does not reflect the true amount of risk involved in switching from AutoCAD to another program. There is risk involved. You never know exactly what to expect. These programs, they're getting better and better all the time. They're improving faster than AutoCAD is, but a lot of the stuff you take for granted in AutoCAD, you might run into situations in these programs where you either have to find a workaround or it just doesn't work, or who knows. So just keep that in mind. The second thing I want to mention is that these productivity factors are very important. They probably affect the bottom line more than any other factor on this whole spreadsheet. I mentioned that I've only done free trials with BricsCAD, so I'm not familiar enough with these programs to really say that my productivity factors are accurate. Furthermore, this productivity factor of 1 for AutoCAD is by no means a ceiling. If you're willing to put the time into switching from AutoCAD to another program, you might even be able to have a productivity factor in an AutoCAD alternative that's faster than your current productivity factor in AutoCAD. So it would take some work, of course, but yeah, this is not a ceiling. This spreadsheet, however, I won't demonstrate that in the spreadsheet because it's not equipped to handle a productivity factor higher than 1. So okay, so let's finally get into some actual scenarios. So the first scenario I'm going to do is working lots of hours per week. So let's say 30, and this is drafting hours, remember? So if someone's job duty is drafting and strictly drafting, they're still only going to draft for about 30 hours per week. So you got to think of work meetings, bathroom breaks, maybe they're dealing with emails, and whatever else, right? So 30 hours per week, that's probably, if someone's working regular time, that's probably accurate. Let's say it's an engineering office. They bill their employees out at a high rate. So one thing I know is that when people start working overtime or they're swamped with too much work, quality drops. That means there's more revisions, more mistakes, just everything goes downhill. So opportunity cost of $100, that's fairly accurate, I think, in a situation like this. I'm going to leave all this stuff alone for now. We're going to go right down to the bottom line. And the average hourly cost for AutoCAD ends up being worlds cheaper than any of these other programs. So you might be wondering why I have a productivity factor of 0.9 listed for AutoCAD Lite. In reality, if I'm using an AutoCAD system where I heavily leverage AutoLisp, my productivity factor would actually be even lower, right? 0.75. So that becomes insanely high. So that's one flaw with the spreadsheet, is it probably weighs the productivity factor too heavily, but it still gives you a clear picture that if you're going to take a productivity drop of more than, say, 5%, it's very unlikely that switching is actually going to be worthwhile. And that's another important thing I want to mention. I hope I didn't mention it too many times in this video, but you got to put the work in. You got to put the time and energy into making sure your transition goes smoothly. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes a lot of offices made when they switch from AutoCAD to Revit. So surprisingly, BricsCAD and GStarCAD end up being more expensive as well. If I change these productivity factors to 1, BricsCAD still ends up being a little bit cheaper than AutoCAD, but not by a heck of a lot, right? And that's because you're putting in a lot of hours per year, so you're dividing drafting hours per year by these subscription fees. So this is a very important factor, you guys, is that if you're putting in the hours and earning a good rate of return for each of those hours, your average hourly cost, it doesn't really matter what your subscription fees are. They're not going to be that high. And maybe next I'll just switch some parameters up here just so you can get a feel for things like the initial cost, how much they actually affect the bottom line. But yeah, if you're in a high paying or a high revenue situation where you're putting in a good amount of time, it's a little bit risky to switch from AutoCAD. Okay, so with the same number of hours per week, same opportunity cost, I'm just gonna switch some parameters in favor of these other programs. So change all these to 10. Actually, I'll turn that back. I'm going to scroll down here. Just going to show you what we're dealing with right now. So 1.52, 90 cents, 75 cents per hour, and 87 cents per hour. So I'm going to change all these to 10. 10 years of expected software use. So you can see these initial costs just drop off quite substantially. Going down, now they've shrunk quite a bit, right? I'd shy away from putting a number too high right here for your expected years of software usage because it becomes less conservative, right? But as you can see, now it's beginning to look more worthwhile that switching is beneficial. And that's kind of true because the longer you use the software, the more likely you are to benefit from the cost savings. But in today's world, with all the BIM programs coming out and whatnot, it's very tricky to say if actually switching from one program to another one, there's so much uncertainty, right? So that's one reason I put such a low value in here to begin with. So number of years between upgrades, let's change this to 4. As you can see, that this row right here doesn't have a big effect on your bottom line, especially in a high revenue, high hour situation. I'm gonna change it back. The next thing I'm going to do is start messing with these productivity factors. You can see that even if I put a slightly lower value in here, costs shoot up above what you'd be paying for AutoCAD on an average hourly cost basis. So your productivity, it has to be right up there. It has to be like a 0.05% drop in productivity would theoretically swing things in favor of AutoCAD, something that small. But yeah, the more time you spend with these software programs, the more time you invest in them, the more likely you are to get this up to 1 or even higher. So that's a very important one reason to go through the spreadsheet alone is just to make sure you know the importance of your initial costs. Spending money now is going to save you heaps of money in the future. Okay, so next I want to do a scenario where we're drafting for way fewer hours per week, and we don't have a high opportunity cost for those lost drafting or those extra drafting hours. Okay, let's scroll down and see how that affected our bottom line. So as you can see, the costs have really swung in favor of non-AutoCAD products, or even AutoCAD Lite here. But let's start messing with our productivity and see what happens. So even with a bit of a productivity drop, if you're drafting very few hours per week or less hours per week, and you have a lower opportunity cost, things swing in favor of these programs. So as you can see, I got a bit of room to play with these. Anyways, I won't spend too much time on this, messing around with these little parameters, but just giving you an idea of, yeah, if you have a little bit of a productivity drop when switching from AutoCAD, you can probably stomach it financially, knowing that that you're still going to save money. And remember what I mentioned before is that these aren't stuck at these levels. You invest the time getting these programs to run much better, to work much better, you're going to get these productivity factors much closer to the 1 or even beyond 1. So yeah, so going up here, if you're not working very many hours per week and your opportunity cost is relatively low, then switching is a much more attractive proposition. Okay, so before moving on, I'm just gonna play with these parameters right here, and we'll have a look see at how much these will affect the bottom line. So let's say you're only planning to use these short term, maybe for a few years, 5 years in this case. Scrolling down, you can see that it's still worth switching, even if you're not using the programs for a extended duration. Knock those down to 3. 3 years, we're getting closer to AutoCAD, right? Okay, so before concluding this video, I just want to go over a few important points. The first being risk. I did mention earlier that this row right here, it does allow me to mitigate risk to some degree. Say if the company got bought out, or the software becomes obsolete, or we end up having to switch to something else. But other than that, the spreadsheet doesn't really reflect the risk involved in switching. So for example, if I'm only saving 5 cents, 10 cents per drafting hour, I probably wouldn't switch, because there's always more risk in switching than not switching. That's not to say that AutoCAD itself doesn't come with its own amount of risk. When a lot of these software developers, as they release new versions, sometimes things actually get worse or regress, especially with things going cloud-based, right? Not to say that will happen with Autodesk or AutoCAD, but one example I'm experiencing right now is that I'm actually having a lot of trouble with Microsoft's OneDrive. It's hurting my productivity quite a bit, right? So staying with AutoCAD, it's not a zero risk proposition, but it's probably less risky than switching. Next, let me just say that if you're really good with these programs, or you're good at customizing them, maybe you do custom programming, you're good at figuring things out, you're going to have more success switching compared to someone who's less hands-on. So if using CAD, if you're earning good money in CAD, but you don't want to really dig deeply into getting the most performance out of your CAD program, then things would swing in favor of staying with AutoCAD opposed to switching. The last thing I want to briefly mention is the fact that these programs, in my opinion, they seem to be developing and improving at a faster rate than AutoCAD. So right now, if this bottom line, if it doesn't really justify switching right now, maybe in 1 year, 2 years, it's definitely worth keeping an eye on these programs, because switching might make a lot more sense in the future, right? So anyways, as mentioned earlier in this video, I'm kind of uploading this to YouTube as a rough draft just to gauge general interest in the subject. So yeah, if you want to learn more about AutoCAD clones, if you think the subject is worth pursuing further, definitely leave a comment or even just hit like. I might upload an entire playlist, including a better version of this video itself. So this video ran a lot longer than I originally intended, so I got to give you a big thanks for watching all the way to the end, and hopefully you're able to gain some useful insights into whether or not it's actually worth switching from AutoCAD to an AutoCAD clone.